Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Self Within, where we explore the magic, mess, and the medicine of coming home to your authentic self. So, today we are going to be talking about hormones, specifically women's hormones and hormonal health, and really the importance of understanding and honoring the natural rhythm of the female body. Joining me today for this conversation is Lauren Oliver, who is a yoga therapist, integrative health coach, and the creator of the Flow Code, which is a program designed to help women find greater ease with their menstrual cycles. So, welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me on, Annabelle. I'm so excited. I'm so grateful to be here and have this conversation. And I do just want to apologize up front that I sound a little bit congested. I'm just healing from a cold, so bear with me with that.
Yeah, of course. The seasons are already changing, so no surprise there.
Yes, change of seasons is incredibly relevant for this conversation, so it's
Ooh,
all aligned.
okay. Oh, I'm curious. Okay, that's so interesting with the seasons. So, before we dive in, because I know there is so much to get to with all of this, and I know I've done my own kind of research, I've been on my own journey when it comes to hormonal health, but tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that you do and how you really got into this topic in particular.
As you mentioned, I am a certified yoga therapist and integrative health coach, but I am passionate about the menstrual cycle specifically because it is an area that I struggled with so much. I have always, I think, been on this path, honestly, from birth, for this work in health and wellness to be my purpose because I was born with a heart defect and experienced a lot of medical trauma for a really young age that left me seriously disembodied despite being an athlete as a kid and through high school. It took me about 15 years to get diagnosed with endometriosis and adenomyosis. So that is a part of my story. And until that, it was really normalized for me from my mom, who had similar experiences with her cycles, that periods are just painful for some people. And when I say that my period was painful, I mean I was having intense cramps, like labor style cramps, as an 11 and 12-year-old, and passing out and throwing up and sweating, and my blood pressure completely plummeting. And it was really, really awful. And I hated getting my period. I hated it. And so it was a really long journey for me to come to the place where I am now, which is honoring my cycle and the phases of my cycle and really having so much ease with my cycle. I actually just am out of the menstrual phase of my cycle right now, and it was so easy and so peaceful. And even though, and I'm sure we'll dive into this more, even though it did ask me to slow down a little bit, I no longer have any pain with my period. And none of those other GI type symptoms that I used to get all of the time exist for me anymore. And so much of that is a reflection of how much work I have done and how deep of a dive I have had to do to get to this place of harmony with my own rhythms. So that's why I felt so passionate about bringing this to other people, because I am constantly meeting women who have such painful periods and they hate this part of their month. And for some of them, the part of the month where they're bleeding lasts an entire week. And, imagine hating and just kind of gritting your teeth and bearing it through an entire quarter of your fertile years. That's not, in my mind, a way to live. We can do so much better. We can have so much better. So I really feel so strongly about bringing this knowledge to other women and helping them to start to heal their own cycles.
Thank you so much for sharing that and what you went through. There are parts of that that I resonate with, especially the painful cycle piece. And what's interesting is the pain for me came on Recently, it was like within the last maybe year where all of a sudden I started experiencing, like right before my period, I felt like I couldn't actually walk. Like I was immobilized, really. I
Mm.
was sitting in a chair and I would have this like pain and I would try to get to the bathroom and I remember not being able to walk. And I thought, what is going on? I was really scared because that's never happened to me ever. I never had a type of period like that. And it's funny because of course, I talked to my husband about it. And he was like, well, maybe you're just getting older. Like maybe that's just a part of like the different changes in your body. And I thought, yeah, maybe. But I'm like, damn it, I don't want that. I don't want these like painful cramps. Like, is this going to be my life for the next 10 years or going forward? Right. So I resonate with that. And when I was younger, I had a lot of irregular periods. Like I never knew when my period was coming. And I was the worst at keeping track too. So I was the person that would go to the doctor's office and they would say, so when was your last period? And I would be like, I don't know. It was like maybe a week ago. And I always thought that they looked at me like, how does this woman not know? And so yeah, there was always this inconsistency and PMS symptoms. But again, I thought all of that was normal. And that's the next thing I want to talk about because there's a bit of like maybe just getting into PMS for a second, right? What is PMS? Because I think from what I understood growing up, like the teaching you get from parents is like, well, this is just something you're gonna go through every month and you're gonna put up with it. And it may be uncomfortable, but that's what it is. There was a little bit of this underlying storyline, just suck it up, right? And
Oh yeah.
so when the symptoms come up, you're like, well, it is what it is. I'm going to be cranky and moody and bitchy and yada, yada, yada. And it doesn't help that that storyline is also told in other ways in society or on TV. So,
Yeah.
yeah, going back to PMS, like, are we supposed to have PMS or what is this?
Yeah. Okay. So PMS standing for premenstrual syndrome. It takes place in the late luteal phase. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the phases, but late luteal phase is the phase right before you start your bleed. And so it's really just a collection of symptoms. So, as you mentioned, mood swings are really common, bloating, or maybe food cravings, like craving chocolate is super common. And also, as you mentioned, really popular in pop culture, right? Like movies and TV shows, women craving chocolate. Fatigue shows up a lot in the luteal phase. And so, what's really happening in this late luteal phase from a hormonal perspective is you get this big spike in progesterone during the luteal phase, where if fertilization of the egg occurs and there's implantation, that progesterone continues to increase to support a pregnancy. But if implantation does not occur, then progesterone drops and that second little spike of estrogen also drops. So you have this significant decrease in hormones that happens. And so it's that sudden decrease in hormones that really triggers the shedding of the uterine lining and that triggers the menstrual blood to start. So I wouldn't say that it's problematic that you have less energy unless it gets in the way of living a happy and healthy life. Like everyone can kind of check in with themselves, whether fatigue is okay, I just need to slow down. I'm feeling like I need to move a little slower, or I cannot get out of bed. I'm so exhausted. I'm dragging. Like there are degrees of these things. But I really feel like a lot of people normalize the extreme end of things. I have heard so many things from working with clients on these types of issues specifically, like every month during their luteal phase, they get in huge fights with their partner, they break up with their partner, and for the rest of the month, there are actually no problem in their relationship, or you name it, just extreme anxiety, extreme depression. And normalizing that, I think, is a problem. And what I think really is going on, from my perspective, is that PMS is often something out of alignment. So maybe we're really stressed, we're not nourishing ourselves well, we're not eating enough or eating enough of the right foods, we're ignoring our body or trying to ignore our body's call to slow down during this time. So we're trying to push through, we're resisting what is and what we are noticing. So it's not just a random like curse, it's feedback for us. That's how I like to view PMS, and that's how I like to view irregular periods, period pain, all of these things. They're feedback for us. I think Lara Bryden, she's a well-known doctor who works with the menstrual cycle. I think she coined calling your period a report card of how the previous month went. But that's how I like to see PMS as well. PMS is, like feeling a little emotional is normal because we have this drop in hormones. But if things get really intense, this is a signal that something is out of alignment. And that's where we need to do a little bit more digging and start to learn how to support our bodies better with how we're eating, how we're moving, how we're resting to align with each of the phases that we're in. And so if we start to do those things, I've seen over and over and over again, I've seen it for myself and for clients, PMS can either lessen dramatically or completely disappear. So, no, I do not think PMS is something we have to suffer through or is just a part of the package that we're dealt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I can testify that as soon as I started to take control, it's really just having more awareness for myself throughout my month, knowing my phases, knowing what was going on, how to support myself in each of those phases. I can tell you that I just started this. I mean, just 3 months ago. This is a very brand new thing for me. And
Oh,
since
wow,
that
awesome.
time, yeah, since that time, I've just felt I would say more stable. Like I've felt neutral. I've felt like I understand myself better. I also can cope through what I think may be happening just because I'm like, oh, I'm in this particular phase. I should not do as many workouts or go on more walks, do more yoga, right? Like eat more, certain things like that. Where before I wasn't, I was operating in a system that was the same every single day, every month, more this 24-hour cycle versus 28 days. So I can totally
Right.
testify to things have shifted for me in a really positive way. So maybe just going to the phases that you touched upon, because you're right, the phases may not be well known, which when I think about it now, I'm like, how have I gone most of my adult life? I mean, girls will get their period probably around 12, give or take. And almost 40, and I've spent all those years knowing zero about phases. I had no clue this thing even existed. So what are these phases?
Isn't that amazing?
It's so
It is amazing. Like you are so not alone with that. It's amazing how little education we get about our own bodies and about something that we are going through all the time. So, yeah, I would love to dive into a little bit about the phases just to give you kind of an idea of what's happening physically and then also energetically. So, day one, when we talk about the platonic ideal of a cycle, which of course, bear in mind, everyone's different, and you might not have a 28-day cycle. Maybe your cycle is 30 days or is very healthy and 32 days. Like there is a range of healthy here. But if we're talking about a 28-day cycle, day one is the start of your menstrual phase. So that's the start of your bleed. And we count day one when you have like real red blood, not like some of the light spotting that you might have before your period starts. So you might notice it a little bit when you wipe or something like that. But we're really counting when your flow is beginning as day one. And for most people, that's going to last day one through day five, maybe. And so, what's happening during the menstrual phase is your body shedding the uterine lining from your last cycle because pregnancy didn't occur, right? That implantation didn't take place. And so, as I mentioned when talking about PMS, we had that significant decrease in hormones. So estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest when you're bleeding. So you might feel more tired and more kind of inward, not wanting to be as social, wanting to spend more time sitting on the couch, journaling, being alone. Physically, what's happening? Your uterus is contracting a little bit to release blood and tissue, get rid of all of that you did not need and use in the previous cycle. And energetically, we like to look at the phases of the menstrual cycle as our inner seasons. So this is our inner winter. If you think about winter, it's this time for rest, reflection. We get more still, we get more internal, and things are a little bit more cold. Things are, you want to feel a little bit more cozy. Part of my program, the Flow Code, actually a huge part is Ayurveda and looking at the phases of your cycle from an Ayurvedic lens. So Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine, and it is the oldest continuously practiced form of medicine in the world. It's been practiced in the Indus Valley, which is modern day India and Pakistan, for thousands of years. And in Ayurveda, we look at the doshas. So these are the governing energies of our minds and bodies. And so, just to give you a quick little background, because I think it's important when we're talking about all of these phases, Vata dosha is most dominant during the menstrual phase. So, Vata is epitomized by air and ether, or air and space. So, it's like this increase of airy energy, if you think of wind, movement. And Vata is also closely aligned with the nervous system. Vata governs the nervous system, in fact. And so Vata helps us to shed this lining. It helps with this downward current of energy. And so if Vata is balanced, the flow can feel really smooth. But if Vata is imbalanced, that's when we start to see things like cramping, anxiety, really irregular cycles. Another aspect of imbalance Vata might be a lot of spotting prior to your period beginning. But not to get too into the weeds with that, let's talk about the follicular phase. So, once the bleeding ends, our brain sends out follicle stimulating hormone, which signals the ovaries to grow several tiny follicles, which are just like little sacs that each contain an immature egg. And usually, one follicle becomes dominant and keeps growing. And as it develops, it produces estrogen, which then thickens the uterine lining again. So it prepares the uterine lining for possible pregnancy. It's like padding the nest, making it nice and comfortable for the egg if it's going to be fertilized. So there's that spike of estrogen from that growing follicle, and it lifts our mood, kind of sharpens our focus, makes us more creative. And so this, when we're talking about inner seasons, is likened to inner spring, where we have this kind of fresh, inspired energy. We maybe feel a bit more outward. We want to talk to people. We want to move our bodies more. And so the dosha that governs this phase, this follicular phase of growth, the growth of the uterine lining, the growth of the follicles, is Kapha. So Kapha dosha is governed by earth and water. So it's really stable. It's providing the building energy. And then we get to ovulation, which happens around day 14, but keep in mind, you're not like clockwork going to
Yeah.
ovulate around day 14, especially if, you were a little sick or you had some stress, or there are a lot of things that can interrupt your ovulation and maybe make it a little bit later in the month. But when that dominant follicle that was maturing during the follicular phase is fully mature, then your brain releases a surge of luteinizing hormone, which causes the follicle to burst open and release the egg. And that's what ovulation is. So the egg is released. So when that happens, estrogen peaks, and we also get a bump of testosterone, which makes many of us feel more social and confident and magnetic. And we have that kind of like bad bitch energy,
Right.
and we're a little bit more attractive. And it's also when cervical mucus really shifts to its most fertile state. So energetically, I'm sure you can guess this is like inner summer. We're really outward,
Mm,
we're expressive, we're social, we're like the beach, let's go. And Pitta dosha governs this part of our cycle, ovulatory phase. And Pitta is fire energy and a little bit of water. So, it's energized. And a lot of people who struggle with their cycles can struggle with this description of ovulation because not everyone has an easy time with ovulation. A lot of people get pain with ovulation. A lot of people get a little bit angry, agitated with ovulation. And the reason for that is often because Pitta is imbalanced. So the dosha that's governing this part of our cycles may be out of balance. There may be too much Pitta oftentimes, and that can be causing some of these symptoms to occur, especially during this phase of the cycle. So just keep that in mind if you're hearing this and you're like, I don't feel like going to the beach. I feel like
yeah.
yelling at everyone and going into a cave. Like that's also super valid. And I just want to speak to that because I know not everyone has an easy time with ovulation. But then after ovulation happens, we go into that luteal phase. And, the egg, after it's released, that empty follicle transforms into something called the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone. So that progesterone is keeping the uterine lining stable, ready for implantation if fertilization does happen. And progesterone can also make us feel calmer. It can make us feel a little bit more inward again. And then if there's no pregnancy, the corpus luteum dissolves. And again, we come back to that phase where progesterone and estrogen drop. So we have that at the end of the luteal phase, we have that hormonal withdrawal that triggers the next period. And energetically, this is like autumn. We become more intuitive. We're preparing to release what's no longer needed. We are bringing energy back into our roots, grounding, coming back down, preparing to nourish ourselves with more hearty stews and things with more moisture, more liquid because things are drying up a little bit. Cervical mucus is drying up. And so it's a time of kind of winding down, focusing on details, turning inward. And again, if we push against this shift or if we've not been super nurturing to ourselves and our bodies, or maybe we had a lot of stress, a lot of things outside of our control, then that's when PMS often shows up. And we might have some of those symptoms we were talking about, some GI symptoms, some mood symptoms, bloating, headaches, all of those things.
Wow, there is so much there, so much for each of the phases. And I love how you really aligned them to the doshas and with Ayurveda. Like I just know very little about Ayurveda, but I do know about the doshas. And so that's really, I hadn't thought about it that way. I'm a very seasonal person. So for me, knowing winter, spring, summer, autumn, like that's another layer that's so helpful as I think about the different phases and when they're coming, when they're going, things to focus on, things to eat.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that luteal phase is also that transition from the pitta energy of ovulation back to Vata. So Vata is coming in with
Mm.
autumn. So if you think about what's going on outside, especially if you're in the Northeast, you're in somewhere that gets all four seasons, the wind tends to pick up. It tends to get chillier, colder. So a lot of these qualities of Vata, of this air and ether energy, you see manifested outside. So it's not just within us, but also out in the natural world. And so that can really help to frame things for yourself, to think about things in terms of seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So sticking with that, Are there particular times when it's better to do certain activities? So, for example, if I wanted to plan my month and knowing that it's not 100% perfect, but sort of planning ahead and thinking like, okay, this is when I can be social or when I'll be more social than usual, or this is the time when I should be doing more self-care and, more journaling, things like that. How can we use our phases to think about just our approach to life in general?
Yeah, so to be totally honest with you, one of the big reasons that I created this program in the first place is because I saw so much one size fits all advice about cycle syncing on the internet. And so many people that were like, you should be doing your HIIT workouts when you're ovulating or whatever the advice was. Absolutely, like to regulate your cycles, eat raw vegan or whatever it was. Just like
Mm,
so much one size fits all advice around the menstrual cycle, around cycle syncing. And I do think it's more individualized. And so within my program, one of the things that I help folks with is understanding their own constitution, because that is important and comes into play. Not everyone was born with the same needs, with the same balance of doshas. And so the way that you eat or you move might be very different
mm,
from the way that I eat and I move to be optimally healthy and well. But my advice really is to start to track your cycle and start to notice what you personally feel in each phase of your cycle. Because you might not feel super social and outward when you're ovulating. And so it wouldn't make sense for you to schedule meetings and to schedule events and all of these things when you're ovulating. It wouldn't make sense for you to align your calendar that way. But it would be great for you to take note of that and start to get curious about,
mm,
okay, so the general energy that I'm hearing with ovulation is I should, well, not should, is that, it's common to feel more outward, have this more active energy during ovulation. And I don't feel that way. Let's start to get curious about what you are feeling and why you're feeling that. And so that would be my general advice for anyone before you want to look to try and design your month around your cycle
right.
is to kind of get more familiar with how the phases are affecting you personally. Because if you're having really awful PMS, get curious about what symptoms you're experiencing. And oftentimes, folks that have really bad PMS have really imbalanced Vata, have excess Vata in their system. And to talk about that in more kind of Western medical terms, we might say that they have dysregulated nervous systems. They might be experiencing chronic stress. And so those are aspects, those are things that might imbalance Vata. They might be running off of caffeine and adrenaline.
Mm,
That is really common. If you are running off of caffeine and adrenaline and you're also eating really dry, raw foods that are hard for your digestive system to break down. So maybe you're dealing with some constipation. You might have this whole constellation of symptoms. And if that's the case for you, start to get curious about what you're experiencing. And so I really think that most people, unless you've been doing this work for a while, have some room for greater harmony with their cycle. And it's not necessarily about how you're designing your work calendar. It's about starting to listen more deeply to your own body, starting to get more embodied and get out of the logicking your way through things mentality. Because I think the more that we can start to listen and get in tune with what's going on with our own energies, the more we can start to gently course correct when things become out of balance. That's not to say that I don't change how I'm moving I think if you do nothing else in terms of cycle syncing, right? If you're brand new to cycle syncing and you're like, this feels a little overwhelming, focus on your luteal phase and your menstrual phase, and that can go a long way. And so I start to really nurture myself
Mm.
during my luteal phase. Certain things that I do to really nurture myself is start to kind of downshift in my workouts. I start to do a lot more mat practices. So, as my body is asking for them, so I tune into my intuition. I just get more inward in that phase. So I will do more yoga and more moving and breathing. I will do more just breath work practices, more meditation practices. And like I'm listening to my body the entire time. And if I'm starting to feel heaviness in my pelvis, then I'm like using that to guide me forward into how I'm moving, how I'm breathing. I'm regulating my nervous system more intentionally during this phase. And I'm doing things as far as nutrition is concerned to balance Vata. And one of the biggest pieces of this, which is always the least popular advice, but I'm going to say it, is I cut out coffee. And so that was a huge piece of the puzzle for me in healing my painful cycles and finding more balance is I for a couple months cut out coffee entirely, but I've come to balanced enough state that I can just cut out coffee for the couple of days before my cycle and throughout my entire menstrual phase.
Mm.
Maybe adding coffee back in the last day or something if I've been feeling good. But the reason for that is that coffee really increases Vata, it irritates Pitta, and it is oftentimes a driving factor in folks' anxiety, in the IBS type symptoms that people get. So it's super, super common for people to have a period of constipation right before their bleed, and then right before their bleed, have diarrhea. So that kind of constipation, diarrhea pipeline, I guess you could say, is worsened most often by coffee. And coffee causes more extreme cramping. There's a lot of reasons to experiment with releasing coffee from your routine during your luteal phase and your menstrual phase and seeing what happens there. Anything that's a nervous system stimulant. So if you're someone who uses nicotine, that would be something to cut out, hopefully completely in general for your overall health, but especially during this part of your cycle, cutting back if you can't cut it out. But anything that's a nervous system stimulant, you want to really avoid during your luteal phase. And so that is something that if you were to only make one switch, that would be what I would recommend. As a blanket statement for most folks, that is going to have a big impact.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I've definitely heard the coffee thing before. I'm reading this book right now. I think it's called Flow Living. But anyway, they talked about how coffee just had a negative impact, I think, overall for the menstrual cycle and things like that. And so I haven't yet. It's funny that you say that it was unpopular because when I heard that in the audiobook, I was like, I don't think I could do that just yet. But I do have to
It
say,
is I tell you,
I'm
I
on
can't
one
tell you
cup
how
of
many times I have heard that exact thing. They're like, yeah, 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 I totally want to regulate my menstrual cycle. I'm really struggling. And I've heard coffee's not great for it, but I'm not going to try that one yet. So I hear that all the time. It's so unpopular, and I get it.
I
Um, I
And
get
of course, I justify it because I'm like, well, I'm only a one cup of coffee a day kind of person, so it
yeah.
can't be that bad, you know.
And
So,
all of the thing, right? You know, you read all these studies, coffee is great for your liver. Liver health is important for your menstrual cycle, for your hormones overall. And that is all wonderful and true, but it does not negate the fact that it's not your friend during this part of your cycle.
right,
But, you know, everyone has to come to their own conclusions in their own time. And it might not be the right time to try it for everyone, but if you're feeling resistance to it, maybe get a little curious about why.
And I love that you also said to try to give it up specifically during the menstrual phase, right? Or during the luteal phase. So it's not a total give up. You can go a couple of days with a tea or something else that
Yeah.
will help with the caffeine that you're still needing, but it's a little gentler and things like that. So, I mean, I've definitely done coffee breaks. Like it typically happens around the beginning of the year where I'm like, I've had too much. I need like 3 months without coffee. And I do it and I'm totally fine. So I think if I reframed it that way, where a couple of times during my month I do tea, I will survive. Like I'll be totally fine.
Totally, totally. And I think it can be really helpful for folks to like really go all in, like just take that step for 1 month, see what happens, see how you feel to cut out coffee for the couple days before, you're due to get your period and for the first couple days of your cycle and see if it makes it a difference for you, if it changes your symptoms. And oftentimes that's enough of a positive reinforcement for folks to be like, okay, there's something to that, and that's motivating enough for me to give this a go. And it's just a part of my routine now as I just cut out coffee. I know
Right.
that it's the way for me. And I love coffee. Trust me, I love coffee. And I have a toddler and I like my caffeine boost too. So for me, what is really helpful, all of the chai spices are actually quite balancing for Vata.
Um,
So I switched to chai tea, just 1 cup or even a half a cup, and have a little bit of that like warming, nourishing chai energy, the cinnamon and cardamom and star anise, all of those really lovely spices. If you can look forward to what you're substituting for coffee,
yeah.
that's the way to go. So I do that, and I also cacao is a little energetically drying. It can be. And so your mileage might vary for this. If you're someone who's super Vata imbalanced, like maybe give this a try down the line after you've had a little bit more experience cutting out coffee, just to give you more of a frame of reference of what's working and what's not. But I also occasionally will swap in a cup of cacao for my morning coffee. And that's really lovely too, because cacao is a great source of magnesium. So magnesium is really important for your circulation, blood flow. We want blood flow to be moving really easily. And so magnesium is great. So when folks are craving chocolate, I don't ever say like, oh, you got to cut that out because the sugar, because whatever. I just say that could be really a sign that your body is craving that magnesium. It's asking
Mm.
for more. And so maybe you can incorporate cacao. Maybe you need a magnesium supplement, just things to, again, it's always just getting curious. How is that showing up for you and why? And if you're someone who's like, I can eat 7 bags of M&Ms before my period, well, maybe that's like, the sugar
Oh,
is not the most balancing, but like maybe have some really rich dark chocolate and see how that assuages the craving. See if that works. Yeah.
well, it's interesting that you're saying that and mentioning the magnesium thing. So I've actually noticed that my cravings have gone down after I've started cycle syncing. I don't have as much of that sugar crave as I used to. And I guess to your point, I'm allowing myself to have chocolate. There's this thing with menstruation, and I don't know if other women feel this or experience this or if you resonate with this, but for me, there was a lot of like both shame and guilt with it. And I think more leaning heavily on the guilt side because there is this guilt of like thinking that I should always be the same all the time. And so with my workouts, right, I need workouts to just feel like myself. I always do it. I do it every day if I can. And so when there were times in my month where I was not feeling energized, I would feel the guilt trip of like, why? Why I should be pushing myself just as hard. I should be doing the same exact workout. And I was never giving myself a break. So there was a lot of guilt there. Or, if I was feeling like I wanted to eat more right before my period, there was more guilt because I wasn't understanding that my body actually needed it. And instead, I thought of it more as like, why am I not eating the same way as I was last week? because last week I was doing great. I was sticking to my veggies, I was doing all these salads, and right now I don't want any of that. Like I want the bread and the carbs and the chocolate and the, right? And I think as women, we also know that we tend to crave more right before menstruation during that luteal
Yeah.
phase. But for me, there was a lot of guilt there because I didn't want to be that way. Like I wanted to be doing what I was doing, which felt healthier. And since I've become more aware of my phases, I've allowed myself to eat more, but I've started choosing better options, right? Like, okay, I need to have more protein. I'm now allowing myself to have bigger breakfast. Like, I'll do like an egg with toast and a yogurt. And whereas earlier in my cycle, I'm not wanting that much. Like, I can stick to like just basic oatmeal and be totally fine. So yeah, but all of those food shifts have helped me ultimately with cravings. And it was never a goal, but that's something I've definitely noticed. And I've also added supplements to my daily routine. So I was also never a person that had multivitamins or anything like that. I think it was more out of laziness. I was like, "Ugh, I just don't want to have to do something that's like routine." And now I've added a multivitamin that's for women specifically. I do a magnesium, I do a probiotic, and all of those things in combination have just been so helpful for me.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned guilt because guilt and shame, but especially when we're thinking about guilt, it's like you think that you should be more disciplined or something
Mhm.
when really what was coming up for you is that your body was speaking to you and telling you that you need something different. And your body is so wise to
Yeah.
say, the salads are not working for me right now. I don't want the salad right now. Raw veggies are great for your microbiome, are great for blood sugar balance. Fiber is great, but are harder to digest and can be imbalancing for Vata if you're having so many raw veggies. And so your body already knew that you want to lean into more of those healthy fats. You're wanting some of that deeper nourishment. And the veggies are wonderful and give you energy and prana, but you have to find that balance. And so I think also when it comes to our practice as women, our challenge as women with working with the menstrual cycle, especially if you resonate as someone who's like athletic, who you need to work out to feel like yourself, which I totally get that. I feel that way as well. The challenge is surrender, really, and is acceptance. And so that is not easy, but it is understanding where you're at, feeling what is right now and not resisting it. And so I love that you said allowing yourself to eat more when you want to eat more has helped reduce your cravings. It's like the moment you give
Yeah.
yourself permission to feel how you feel, the moment you give yourself permission for things to be as they are, there's that pressure release that happens. You're like, oh. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it has been so freeing. And, I've also been excited to talk to my two girls, and I'm like, I can't wait until they get to their menstrual cycles because I'm in such a better place to be able to share with them like my knowledge and my awareness so that hopefully they can start really early with all of these practices, like being gentler with themselves, like knowing that when they are in their menstrual phase, like it's totally cool to just chill on the couch and not want to be social and have friends over. Like, let's allow ourselves to just be like, yay, this is our time for just relaxing, doing self-care. And then soon enough, you'll have your springtime where it's get up and go. Let's like do this thing, right? And so I'm starting to benefit from it so much by knowing myself that way. And yeah, I'm looking forward to be able to talk to them about it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. My daughter is going to be 2 in October, so we have a little ways to go. But yeah, I love that. And the more that we educate ourselves on this. I feel like it's so healing across generations. And it's also healing for ourselves, but we're also doing this healing work for all of the women before us, moms, grandmas, who were fed this kind of culture of
Right.
shame around menstruation and told to kind of hide it or that it's normal to be in pain and just suck it up and deal with it. So I think this work is so incredibly important and powerful in empowering ourselves, our generation, and our children as well.
Yeah. And I think also for men, because of course, what we're talking about is very female focused, but what is your take on how men could either benefit from understanding the menstrual cycle or how can they support really the women in their lives by knowing this, right? Because I think they were told a certain story of how to approach women during their menstrual cycle and what to say and what not to say, or like what to expect and not to expect, right? So it's a bit of this like re-educating, as you said earlier, not just for women, but I think also for men. And there's a lot I think that we could talk about there. But, I've become so much more open talking to my husband about like, I'm in my luteal phase and right now I'm in follicular and this is going to be a great week, and we kind of joke about it, but I live my life that way now where I'm like, this is the phase I'm in. And also knowing that I can be more vulnerable at a certain time, right? And so I just put it out there where I'm like, hey, this is luteal. Like I may just be wanting hugs and certain things can make me cry now, right? Like I'm in a more vulnerable state. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as you alluded to, men naturally operate on more of a diurnal rhythm. So circadian rhythm is what's most important to them, like day to night. And their energy is like more consistent from one day to the next, like throughout the month. Whereas women, we operate on a much longer cycle, and week to week, we have really different energy levels and different capacities for different types of work. And so when we think of work, the workforce, and like you mentioned, that feeling of like guilt, like if you're working with men in the workforce, it can be challenging to strike this like balance, this harmony of showing up and working hard and contributing. But we also have different levels of energy throughout the month. And so I think the more men understand this, the more one, there's an appreciation, hopefully, for the gift of these different phases, because there is a lot to be said for having that more detail-oriented focus during the luteal phase, for example, versus like big picture focus during your follicular phase. There are so many gifts to this shifting energy. And so hopefully there's like greater grace extended either to your partner or to women that you're working with. There's more empathy and more allowance for those shifts in energy. But I also hope that by being more open, by talking more about this sort of thing, because we're talking about, shifting energy levels and really getting more in tune with our own bodies, it provides an inspirational kind of example of being embodied, really. And hopefully it encourages men to get in tune with their own energy levels and their own bodies. And I say that because even though the circadian rhythm is more important for them, everyone has their own balance of doshas, and they have what's called the prakriti, is like your constitution, what you were born with, what you came here with. But then there's the vikriti, which is like your current state of balance or imbalance. And so things can get out of balance for men as well. And so starting to lead by example in that way, like talking about like, oh, I'm in my luteal phase and my energy is lower and I'm feeling a little bit more like my nervous system needs nourishment. Like that is really a beautiful example that we can provide for how to give ourselves love. And I'm hopeful that men who are learning more about the menstrual cycle kind of use that as inspiration for giving themselves more love as well and being more attuned to what's going on with their own rhythms, because just because they're not going through a menstrual cycle, they still have shifts in energy, and that might be seasonally, for example. So, men and women can only benefit from learning about these things, whether it's just being more in harmony with the people in their day-to-day life or more in harmony with themselves.
Right, right, totally. I'm curious, we've talked a lot about tracking early on, and I wanted to hear from you. Do you use anything in particular to help you track your cycle so that you're more aware of when the phases are showing up for you? Also knowing that everyone starts on a different day and everyone's a little different.
I wish I had a great answer for you. And I know there are all sorts of apps out there that people use, but I legitimately put a little star in my planner for day
Okay.
one
Yeah,
of
yeah.
my cycle. I'm so old school in that way. I'm literally just like, yep, star, started my period. And so I'll know when to expect my next period to start. But no, I don't use anything fancy. I am just I'm very pen and paper over here.
Okay. Yeah, no, no. I mean, that totally works for some people. I know that I use this app called Lively. And like you said, I think there are so many different apps in the App Store, but I ended up paying for the annual subscription, which I don't think was a lot. It might have been like $29 for the year or something like that. And you put in the day that your period starts, and then it tracks it for you on a calendar, and it grays out or shows in different colors, like when you're expected to be in a particular phase. And then if you click on that, like it'll give you suggestions for certain things to eat, do. And there's one other one, which for me is like helpful because then it's like, you should be doing more yoga and stretching now, or you should be eating more, whatever, protein rich foods. And then it gives you like a full list of all the possible foods or activities that you could do. So yeah, that one has been super helpful for me.
Yeah, I've used some of those apps in the past, and I do really recommend if you're like trying to conceive, for example, tracking your basal body temperature, and that can be super simple, or you can pay for an app to log all of your information and have it beautifully charted and all of those things. Or you can literally just wake up in the morning, take your temperature, write it on a piece of paper on your nightstand, which is more my speed, but
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
totally.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So this has been so awesome. Is there any final reminder or anything that you want to leave our listeners with in terms of something to do or something to think about as it comes back to living in sync with their body, with their cycle, with their natural rhythm?
Oh, great question. So, I mean, my program, the Flow Code, is focused on Ayurveda, and I do think that that is a really wonderfully user-friendly way to dive in, like a really beautiful framework for looking at the menstrual cycle and gaining a deeper understanding of where you might be a little imbalanced, where there's kind of room for improvement. And by improvement, I mean room for greater ease and joy and pleasure and all of those things. And so, learning a little bit about Ayurveda, I always encourage folks,
Mm.
but if we want to keep things super, super simple, just make a practice, make a ritual of mindful check-ins. Like have a space every day where you pause, stop what you're doing, stop that little mental hamster wheel that's running, and notice how you feel. Notice what's going on in your body. Check in with the sensations that you're feeling. Check in with how you're breathing. Check in with what's going on in your head. And that can be such an impactful first step because until you make that a practice and make that something that your brain and your body just default to, we can be really unaware of our own cycle and our own shifting energy. And we can't do anything to fix or change them if we don't know, if we're not familiar with them. So that would be my recommendation first and foremost. Just find that moment of pause every day.
Love that. So with the flow code, is that something that's starting up soon, or is it just like an online course that you can sign up for?
Yeah, so there is a pre-recorded course that folks can just buy and go through it at any time. But the next live cohort is going to be beginning in October. And so I really do highly recommend the camaraderie, the accountability, and support of the group is huge with that. And we dive into balancing each dosha. So it's not just for folks who have painful, irregular cycles, although it's incredibly helpful if you are experiencing that. It's so good for your overall health, like mental, physical health. It's so good for your overall health to get an understanding of your doshic balance, and to do that in the setting of a group is really powerful and wonderful. I ran the beta group starting in June, so we wrapped up just recently, and the feedback from that group was wonderful. We had so many different people coming in. So one woman got off of birth control after 17 years with the support of this group and was really nervous about how that would go and how that would feel starting back with her natural cycles. And so that was one experience. We had another woman who was struggling with some perimenopause symptoms, another woman who was really struggling with painful, irregular cycles that were interrupting her workday. And so hearing the feedback from folks and hearing how well things went for them and how different they felt after just 8 weeks with our container was really just such a wonderful blessing for me. And so it just makes the work so fulfilling to hear how much of a difference it made for them. So we are going to begin it in October. I would love if anyone listening wanted to join us. So keep an eye out for it.
Okay, awesome. That sounds so great. And where else can people find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at The Vibrant Body. And you can also find me just online at thevibrantbody.co. Co.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. This has been amazing. And I love the sort of the addition of Ayurveda to all of this. It's definitely something that I'm taking away from this conversation and something I'll continue to think about as I go through the different phases during my month and how I'm feeling. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you're interested in becoming a client and working with me, visit me at nunatherapy.com or follow me on social media at Nuna Therapy for regular content and inspiration. Until next time.